Today is Sunday, December 17th, 2017, and we are live tonight. We have a jam-packed show for you tonight. It's the last show of the year. So we have a lot to cover tonight. It's been a crazy, crazy week. A lot going on in the news, and we're going to deal with some of those top stories. Well, in Alabama, you know, last week we talked about the U.S. Senate election in Alabama to replace Attorney General Jeff Sessions, former U.S. Senator to Alabama. We see that Doug Jones, the Democrat, won. He won by somewhere around 21,000 votes, something like that. Won in dramatic fashion, came right down to the wire. African Americans organized in Alabama to vote for their own interests. Okay, so we're going to cover that story. I know on News One Now with Roland Martin, they talked about it a lot also. We'll deal with how African Americans organized in Alabama to fight for their own issues by supporting Doug Jones, and they won. And we're going to deal with what we can learn about this across the country, but especially in Detroit. They organized, they helped finance their own initiatives. I wrote 3 articles this past week. You can read all of my articles at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, okay? And this U.S. Senate race was one of the articles that I wrote about. And also I did a YouTube video. It's about an hour long. It's been viewed almost 14,000 times. And I did that this past Wednesday morning, about 12:30 in the morning. The name of that article that I wrote is called Doug Jones Wins Alabama Senate Race, Alabama History, Civil Rights and Racism. Doug Jones wins Alabama Senate Race, Alabama History, Civil Rights and Racism. So check out that article. Then also, we saw that African-American women definitely organized, right, to get out the vote, and they mobilized, but also African-American men did as well. Now, there was rampant voter suppression that took place in Alabama, and has been taking place in Alabama for years. And we're going to deal with some of that because this is an element of this election that a lot of people don't talk about. The voter ID laws that were implemented in Alabama, the closing of Department of Motor Vehicle locations, which made it harder for African Americans to get the necessary picture ID they needed to vote, and the felon disenfranchisement that's been taking place in Alabama. So you have somewhere around 250,000 people in Alabama who can't vote because they have felonies, and Alabama has the largest incarceration rate in the country. Okay, what's going on in Alabama is criminal, and African Americans organized and fought back because they said, we're not going to take this anymore. Now, the question is, when are some people across the country, when are other African Americans going to start fighting back as well? So we'll talk about that. Then we saw, now check this out. This past week, it was Tuesday, right? We got rid of Roy Moore and Omarosa in the same day. Won't he do it? Won't he do it? We got rid of Roy Moore and Omarosa in the same day. So Omarosa gets fired in dramatic fashion from the White House by Chief of Staff John Kelly. We know our girl April Ryan of American Radio Networks, April Ryan, White House correspondent, had some very important information, very important details about this. Now, Omarosa says she quit, she wasn't fired. But no, that's not what other people are saying. They said she was fired, okay? And we know on Good Morning America, she did an interview with Michael Strahan. And Robin Roberts, the anchor there, didn't like a lot what she had to say. And at the end, she said, well, you know, looks like she's going to basically tell a story in a book, right? Looks like she has a book coming out. She said, bye, Felicia, at the end. Omarosa got clowned on Black Twitter. She got clowned on CNN by our girl Angela Rye. We're going to play that clip for you also. You have to hear that. Now, the question, now this was not a good week for Black Republicans, because on CNN, behind the firing of Omarosa, we saw, we also saw Paris Denard, one of Donald Trump's ardent supporters, who's African-American, Black Republican, Paris Denard. You've heard clips of Paris on the show before. I've played for you. Paris Denard gets called a sellout by another Black Republican, Shamichael Singleton, who's a sellout also. But since Shamichael Singleton since Shamichael Singleton was fired by the Trump administration, Shamichael has a little backbone now. So the question we should ask ourselves is, what happens to black Republicans when they have outlived their usefulness to white supremacy? What happens to black Republicans when they have outlived their usefulness to white supremacy? Because we just saw this past week some being called out. We've seen in the past, recently in the last 2 months, Raynard Jackson get exposed by Roland Martin on News One Now, because Raynard Jackson's organization was heavily financed by Robert Mercer. And Robert Mercer is one of the main financiers of Breitbart News and one of the early and main financiers of Donald Trump's campaign. And then Raynard Jackson also said that Stephen K. Bannon is not a white supremacist, not a racist. So what happens to black Republicans when they have outlived their usefulness to white supremacy? This is a valid question. What happens to you? Look at Omarosa. Omarosa's on the outside looking in now. So then also I saw an article from goodblacknews.com, picked up from blavity.com, picked up from the Washington Post, right? And this is about a new joint study from colorchange.org and another organization that deals with how news outlets promote false negative portrayals of black families that don't match reality. How white-controlled news outlets promote a false image of black families that do not match reality. Okay? You got it. This is deep. Now, I've been studying media for 25 years. I've done presentations in the past. The media's deliberate destruction of the African-American family. Empire Strikes Black, the propaganda of the media. Okay? This study right here coincides with the article from thinkprogress.org from March 2015 called How News Outlets Convince You That Most Criminals Are Black. Okay, so we're going to talk about that also. Okay, despite government data disproving them, news outlets perpetuate stereotypes of African Americans such as welfare queens and absentee fathers, even though the data is contradictory to these negative, dysfunctional, stereotypical images that are fed to us of ourselves through white controlled media. We have to deal with that. Power is the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. Power coming from the Latin word potere, meaning to be able. Power is the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. And then we know that Kwanzaa is coming up, December 26th. Kwanzaa falls on a Tuesday. The first day of Kwanzaa falls on a Tuesday. So this is also the last show of the year, right? So happy holidays, happy New Year, happy Kwanzaa. But Kwanzaa is coming up. So in the last segment of the show, we're going to deal with what is Kwanzaa. What is Kwanzaa? Reconnecting African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment. What is Kwanzaa? Reconnecting African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment. Okay, and I will be speaking at some Kwanzaa events coming up. First of all, on December 27th, the second day of Kwanzaa, here in Detroit at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'll be the keynote speaker for the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement's Kwanzaa celebration at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And my presentation will be on what is Kwanzaa, reconnecting African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment in the era of Donald Trump. Reconnecting African Americans to African culture, reconnecting African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment in the era of Donald Trump. All right, so that's what my presentation will be on. I'm the keynote speaker Tuesday, December 27th. The event is 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. It's free and open to the public. Come on out. Now, they have programs all 7 days of Kwanzaa. All right. So I'll be there the first 3 days as a vendor. There'll be an African marketplace. Come on out. Be sure to visit the vendor table of the African History Network. Each day is 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And, when it goes into Saturday, I'm not sure the date. Go to theright.org, theright.org, W-R-I-G-H-T, theright.org. So I'm there the first 3 days of Kwanzaa, the 26th, 27th, and 28th. Now, that Friday, December 29th, Dr. Claude Anderson is the keynote speaker. Okay, Dr. Claude Anderson, you've heard him here on the show before, author of Black Labor, White Wealth, and Powernomics, Dr. Claude Anderson. Friday, December 29th, I will be in Atlanta at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, and we're going to do a screening and discussion of Black Friday Part 2, the latest documentary I'm in, Black Friday Part 2. The Living Legacy World Tour, which connects our African global legacy and African history to economic empowerment. So I'll be speaking at I'll be on the panel discussion. That's Friday, December 29th. Doors open at 6 p.m. It's free and open to the public. You must RSVP. Okay. Go to thefilmblackfriday.com, thefilmblackfriday.com for more information. Because when we did last year for Kwanzaa, when we did a screening at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, it was jam-packed, and we kept having to bring out more chairs. So we know it's going to be packed this year also. I'm on the panel. You've got Tassili Ma'at, who's in the film, and Kennedy Stewart, who's an 11-year-old African-American female entrepreneur. She's the narrator of the film, and of course, director Rick Mathis will be there as well. So we'll get that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and I'll be in Los Angeles December 30th and 31st. Saturday, December 30th, Sunday, December 31st. I'll be speaking at the Christ Unity Center there as well. We'll have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for you. All right. Now, on the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, it corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions. When you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter, also go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Well, this past Tuesday night, I was watching the returns. I was watching the results as the precincts counted the votes in Alabama. And we know that Republicans have a very delicate balance of power in the U.S. Senate, and how crucial the U.S. Senate is. Well, African Americans organized in Alabama to defeat Roy Moore, challenger Roy Moore, Republican, and to put in Doug Jones, who was a former U.S. attorney who prosecuted two of the Klans members who killed the 4 little girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church, September 15th, 1963. Okay? And they talked about this on AM Joy, Joanne Reed. And one of the things they talked about was how African-American voters were a huge factor, but they did not vote because they loved the Democratic Party so much. They organized, they financed a lot of their mobilization, and it was because they were fighting for their own issues. And Doug Jones, his issues best lined up with what they were concerned about, as opposed to Roy Moore. I want to go to this clip here from AM Joy, Joanne Reed. Black voters, activists, huge factors in Doug Jones' win.
Rejecting Republican.
Hey, turn it up in here, please, so they can hear on Facebook.
And the horse he rode in on. Sorry, Kathy.
Instead, a majority of Alabamians chose Doug Jones, the first Democrat the state will send to the United States Senate in 25 years, and a man who made a name for himself prosecuting the KKK members who bombed that church in 1963, killing 4 black girls. The stunning epic victory for Jones and his party was largely a response to sexual misconduct allegations against Moore. But make no mistake, the outcome was also just the latest example of the political power of black voters, as well as the effectiveness of local activists who mobilized voting efforts and won. Joining me now is legal and political analyst Eric Guster, Adrian Shropshire of Black PAC, Bernard Simelton of the Alabama NAACP, and John Hammontree of Reckon Alabama Media Group. Thank you all for being here. And Adrian, I'm going to start with you because I've been reading through the memo that Black PAC put out, and this was on December 12th. And it was about the way that you guys actually ran this campaign. I think the sort of meta-narrative was Doug Jones ran a really smart campaign, the Democratic Party came in and supported him, the national media, collapsed Roy Moore, and that's how he won. But the real story is somewhat different. Tell us how you guys were involved in the effort.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would say that there are probably a couple of takeaways from the election. One is that black voters are clearly sending a message. That message has two pieces, I think. One is that a total rejection of the current political climate that includes Donald Trump, but also includes congressional Republicans in the way that they're handling our government. And the second is that, black voters are rejecting, as you said, the politics of the day, but they're also asserting the type of political leadership that they want to see, the type of progressive, diverse political leadership that they want to see. And for us, what that has meant is being able to mobilize programs, and mobilize this program in particular in Alabama, where we talked to over 100,000 voters. We knocked on 500,000 doors. We talked to voters about issues specifically, not just about candidates. We talked to them about what was at stake in the election. But it was not just us, obviously. Yeah. This was a massive network of grassroots organizations, political organizations engaged in the work. We worked with, obviously, with the NAACP, but also with Dewana Thompson, who ran Woke Vote. They engaged churches across the state, had an HBCU program that mobilized millennial voters. We worked with LaTosha Brown, who coordinated 30 grassroots organizations across the state, specifically in the Black Belt, to make sure that communities were turning out to vote. There was the Southern Election Fund. Yes. There was a massive approach to the campaign itself that really, in some ways, if you were on the ground, what you knew was that black people were turning out to vote. The articles that came out ahead of time that said black people are disengaged, we don't know if they're going to show up. If you were talking to people on the ground, what you knew was that black people were going to show up, and that they were bringing their families, and that they were bringing their neighbors. It wasn't a surprise. It was a relief, for sure, but it wasn't a surprise.
And you guys spent about $2.1 million on your effort. You got about $600,000 from the National Party, but it was also about using, black contractors on the ground, people who actually knew the community, and it was important to do that.
That's right. We partnered with Senate Majority PAC to do this outreach. They stepped up and understood that it was important to invest in organizations of color and to invest in black leadership. And we also worked with folks like John Poe on the ground. We worked with other local elected.
And who's John Poe?
John Poe is an activist and operative in Alabama. That's local.
Eric, I remember talking to you before the election, and one of the sort of criticisms that a lot of people, not just yourself, that I talked to African Americans that are engaged politically, was that the actual Jones campaign itself was not necessarily conversant with how to mobilize black voters. There was that infamous flyer with the skeptical looking black guy, I don't know if we have that to show, where it's saying, this one that said, hey, if, a black man went after high school girls, would anyone make him a senator? A lot of people were offended by that. And so there was a disconnect there that the campaign necessarily didn't know what to do. So how important was it that, more cognizant sort of black organizations filled in the gap?
It was very important, because when black organizations have people on the ground, they know exactly what the black community needs and how to voice those issues and how to voice those concerns. Because the Jones campaign ignored many black vendors who approached them, who ran, for example, the Randall Woodfin campaign, who is a young Randall Woodfin is the mayor of Birmingham, newly elected mayor, who topped a man with 25 years of political experience. There were a lot of people involved in his campaign.
All right, we're going to pause it right there. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break. We're going to go to the phone lines also. And when we come back, we're going to talk some about how Roy Moore and Doug Jones matched up based upon their issues, because African Americans voted based upon their issues, okay, and who would benefit the most in the U.S. Senate. You listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. You listen to 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation, the voice of Detroit. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network. Be sure to visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD presentations are there. We have documentaries that I'm in. You can read all the articles that I write. I wrote 3 articles this past week. One was about Tavis Smiley, because we got to talk about Tavis also. There's a reckoning taking place. There's a purging taking place of men who are accused of sexual assault and sexual misconduct, things like this. Tavis Smiley's show was suspended. That's on PBS. I wrote an article about that. And I wrote 2 articles dealing with the U.S. Senate race. You can read all of my articles that I write at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Connects you to my YouTube channel, because I did a YouTube video about Tavis Smiley as well. You can check that out also. And I want to let you know, remind you that in Detroit, the 27th, Wednesday, December 27th, I'll be the keynote speaker for the Kwanzaa celebration at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And this night that's Kuji Chagalia, which means self-determination. The second night is organized by the Malcolm X grassroots movement. They have me as their keynote speaker each year. This is, I think, maybe the 4th or 5th year they've done it. So I appreciate that, because I don't get asked to speak a lot here in Detroit for Kwanzaa. Not sure why. But I will be speaking in Atlanta on December 29th at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, and on December 30th and New Year's Eve, December 31st, in Los Angeles, both days in Los Angeles, at the Christ Unity Center. The Christ Unity Center, located at 7825 Southwestern Avenue, Los Angeles, California. So we'll have that information on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. The presentation I'll do on New Year's Eve, Sunday, December 31st, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Christ Unity Center, is going to take us into the new year. The name of this presentation is called African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. And we also have that video, that DVD available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, as well. Okay, let's go to the phone lines, and then we're going to go back to the video clip from A.M. Joy about African Americans organizing in Alabama. Not because they love the Democrats so much, but because they were fighting for their own issues that were important to them. Let's go to Saeed. Hey, Saeed, thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from. Hey, walaikum salam, man. Go ahead.
Live in color, brother. I'd just like to ask you, I don't know if you spoke on it tonight, but about a month ago, I asked you about, did you know anything about the mother plan and what Elijah Muhammad was speaking of, saying that the government now has spent $22 million in the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. Now, looking at these flying armadas that's taking over the air all over the country. And I asked you because I spoke with Professor Griff on Coast to Coast about it, and I asked him the same question. And he said it'd take him about 4 or 5 hours to speak about that because of the severity of it. Yeah. And so since now that they came out in the news with it, I'd like to know what's your thought about that, your thought process, and what information.
What was the question you asked me a month ago?
The question is, what do you think about the government spending $22 million on the UFOs, and do you have any type of other information that you can provide?
Well, when you study some oral traditions of African people, like amongst the Amazulu, or the Zulu of Azania Mwini Mutapa of what we call South Africa. Well, not the Dogon yet. Dogon come from ancient Kemet. Not the Dogon yet. They're in Mali and Burkina Faso. They were in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, before they migrated out west to Mali and Burkina Faso. But I'm talking about in southern Africa. When you study the oral tradition of the Amazulu, according to their oral tradition, they say they come from Mars, according to their oral tradition. When you study the oral traditions of African people coming from ancient African cultures, they talk about other planets. Now, when you study the Dogon, according to their oral tradition, they say they come from the Sirius B star system. They talk about Sirius A and Sirius B. Okay, and they had knowledge of that binary star system hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, well, actually probably thousands of years before European astronomers. The European astronomers found out about Sirius A, Sirius B somewhere around 1980, something like that. Okay, so they called Sirius A Sigitolo, and they called Sirius B Potolo. Okay, and the Dogon are master astronomers, and they leave ancient Kemet. They're going to be waves. So one wave leaves around 400 BC. Dr. David Imhotep talks about this in The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. And they eventually end up out in Mali and Burkina Faso. But they have a mastery of astronomy. Okay, so so that's not far-fetched, and they know there's life on other planets, things like that. What happens is, if they were to reveal that, then a lot of people in the religious community are going to be up in arms, because it's going to totally flip upside down what many of them have been preaching.
And that goes into Ezekiel and all of the rest of the stuff that they was been lying about and flipping the game around. So I'm saying where it is said that the mother plane is a destroyer. It comes to destroy the earth after all this inhabitants is up off of it, which Elijah Muhammad spoke about. I was just wondering, is the government trying to give you a small increment of disclosure to try to ease it on to you that they have been coming here all this time?
That's what they do incrementally. Yeah. Now, I don't know what Elijah Muhammad said, but that's what they do incrementally. They incrementally show you the truth so that you can adjust your thought process and your concept of reality, so that it's not a big shock. And they'll put, and some of this information will be put in the movies also. But I encourage people to, huh?
Yes, sir. And the day the Earth stood still.
Yeah, now I encourage people to read the article from AfricanGlobe.net dated January 5th, 2013. The Dogon, D-O-G-O-N, the Dogon, from the Nile Valley, from the Nile Valley to the Kingdom of Mali. The Dogon, from the Nile Valley to the Kingdom of Mali. And this article talks about this very ancient, this very ancient high culture of African people, and they talk about their superior understanding of astronomy. And they have a section in here called Dogon Astronomy and Cosmology. Sigitolo is the name the Dogon give to the distant star Sirius. They had knowledge of the star Sirius thousands of years before Europeans, long before the Greeks. Sirius is actually a Greek word, also referred to as Sirius A. And Potolo is the name given to its smaller companion star, Sirius B. Okay? Now, Sirius A is in the constellation called Canis Major, or the dog star. Okay? So when you study about the constellation of Orion the Hunter and the three stars in Orion's belt, and they all fall in, and the three stars in Orion's belt fall in line with the star Sirius A around December 25th, right? They took, in ancient times, the three stars in Orion's belt were called the three kings.
Right.
So, and this deals with so the three stars in Orion's belt fall in line with the star Sirius A, okay, which is the brightest star in the sky, and they're all pointing to the sun, the Son of God, on December 25th. So then, when you look at the allegory of the three kings, or the three magi, because in the original story they don't say how many there were. But when you look at that, and they're following, and the three kings, those three wise men, follow the star in the east.
Yeah.
It's the star Sirius.
Right.
That's what that is. But so they took astrotheology and put it into allegorical form, and then unfortunately taught us literal history. Because if you look at so when you study that story, it says they're coming from the east, and they're going to Bethlehem, right?
Right.
So when you look at a map, Bethlehem, if I remember correctly, Bethlehem is to the west. Bethlehem is in the wrong direction. Okay, if they were to see that star in the east and follow it, they would go in the opposite direction.
Okay. All right.
Now, when you study Benjamin Banneker did the layout of Washington, D.C. Right. And when you read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, and Tony Browder just with Tony on a panel discussion with Tony November at the Black Power Awards weekend. We did a screening of Black Friday. Part 2. Tony has written the book Egypt on the Potomac. And this book deals with how the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles coming out of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. The layout of Washington, D.C. is basically a copy coming out of ancient Kemet, and there are African symbols all around Washington, D.C., including the Washington Monument, which is a 555-foot monument, which is called a tekken, but the Greeks call it an obelisk.
Obelisk, right.
Yeah, but it's a tekken. And there were 1,200 tekkenu all throughout ancient Kemet. Today there are only about 12. They've been taken to other parts of the world. Paris, France, Istanbul, Turkey, the Vatican City, things like this, right? And Tony does a tour of Washington, D.C. called Egypt on the Potomac, where he takes you all around Washington, D.C., and he shows you the African presence in Washington, D.C., how it's a copy. Well, it's Benjamin Banneker that did the layout. Benjamin Banneker, I think it was his great-grandfather, was Dogon. Benjamin Banneker was a master astronomer. So all this ties back into our history. Read this article from AfricanGlobe.net, the Dogon, from the Nile Valley to the Kingdom of Mali. And this article will totally blow your mind. But this reconnects us to ourselves.
Right. So was the pyramid like a landing plateau, and was the pyramid sculpted and help? Did the slaves get help from them armadas to build the pyramid?
Okay, slaves didn't build pyramids. Slaves did not build pyramids. The slave labor did not build pyramids. 1. Okay. 2, I don't know anything about spaceships landing on the pyramids. I don't even know how they would do that.
Okay. Okay, listen, brother, this is what I would like for you to do. If you would go look at the light that lands on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and then maybe you'll understand where I'm coming from.
Okay. Maybe you'll understand email me at info@africanhistorynetwork.com. Email me that information. info@africanhistorynetwork.com. Okay?
Appreciate you, man.
Okay. Okay. Just an excerpt. We're going to go to John just a second here. Just an excerpt from this article. Because, see, we have to understand how old African people are. All right? The Dogon and ancient people in Africa are mainly populated in the modern nations of Mali and Burkina Faso in West Africa, the epicenter of the historical medieval Mali Empire. When Western anthropologists first began to study Dogon culture, they were baffled at the group's advanced knowledge of the universe. They were specifically astonished at their intricate understanding of the Sirius planetary system, which is Canis Major, Sirius A and Sirius B. Historical commentators believe that the Dogon's cosmological lore goes back thousands of years, at least 3200 BC, during the pre-dynastic age of ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. The Dogon's oral history also includes an Eastern migration, Eastern migration story prior to its settling in the Badiagara Plateau region near the southern edge of the Sahara Desert between the 13th and 16th centuries. Now, let's take this a step further, then we'll go to John, right? So, Sirius, the star Sirius, is called the dog star. Why? Because it's in the constellation of Canis Major, the big dog. So you have Canis Major, the big dog, Canis Minor, the little dog. And the star, the constellation of Orion, the hunter, has his 2 dogs following him, right? So you have a satellite radio station called Sirius, Sirius. And if you go online, you Google it, and I show this in some of my presentations when I deal with ancient Kemet, the winter solstice, and the history of Christmas. If you look at the logo of the satellite radio station Sirius, it's a dog with a star on his head, the dog star. And it was African people who had knowledge. It was the Dogon who had knowledge of this of Sirius thousands of years before Europeans even knew about it. Read this article from AfricanGlobe.net. The Dogon, from the Nile Valley to the Kingdom of Mali. All right, let's go to John. John, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Thank you, O.J. Well, you got a lot of knowledge and information there. I hope you don't convert yourself too much with the history that we're like on the station with now. Because the important thing right now, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your show, but the important thing now is them black souls in Alabama. Now, I have to tell you, from now on, don't put up with no nonsense. People call in with them stupid no nonsense about voting don't count, voting don't count. You told them back then when Trump was running this vote count.
I told them, and people are starting to realize now. If you looked at this horrific tax cut that's about to pass on Tuesday and Wednesday, okay, and then what? And Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Republican, has already said after they pass this tax cut, then they're going to go after Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security because they want to gut that also.
Thank you. And that's right here, right now. And
absolutely.
People don't realize it, but people don't know why that kind of garbage all in that deal and so forth. I mean, it's
an 1,100-page bill. It's an 1,100-page bill, and most of the Republican senators and members of the House of Representatives who are going to vote for it haven't read the entire bill. The previous one from the U.S. Senate just a couple of weeks ago was 479 pages. So they've added another 600 pages? Are you kidding?
And the Democrats, they lost it with that garbage. And a lot more, the Congress and so forth lost. Now, they add over some issue where the leaders at. Now you know where the black leaders at. Alabama. And I hope you don't let them forget it either.
Oh, no.
Keep up the good.
Go ahead.
Keep up the good work and educate them, let them know when they try to come with this nonsense like voting no time and where the black leaders at. Now you all know where they're at. And I hope you get it and be it down the drum and so forth.
All right.
And I want to thank you, Mobilizing. Thank you very much.
All right, John. Happy New Year. All right. And be sure to go to my website and check out my presentation, Ancient Kemet, the Winter Solstice, and the History of Christmas. Because the Winter Solstice is coming up December 20th, December 22nd. That's the first day of Christmas. And the reason why Christmas is celebrated on December 25th is it ties into the winter solstice. You have to understand astronomy to understand this, okay? All right, so I want to go back to this clip here from A.M. Joy. Black voters, activists, huge factors in Doug Jones' win. We're going to back it up about 30 seconds or so from when we left off. African-American voters, particularly African-American women, have been given much deserved credit for helping Doug Jones beat Roy Moore in the Alabama Senate race. Now, there was an article about Paul Mooney, because Paul Mooney said, well, hey, African-American men, 92% of African-American men who voted, they voted for Doug Jones. They came out, they helped rally, they helped organize. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. We know Alabama has the highest incarceration rate in the country. We also know that there's rampant voter suppression taking place in Alabama as well. Let's go back to this clip here from A.M. Joy.
Didn't know what to do. So how important was it that, more cognizant sort of black organizations...
Turn up in here so they can hear on Facebook page, please.
Organizations have people on the ground. They know exactly what the black community needs and how to voice those issues and how to voice those concerns. Because the Jones campaign ignored many black vendors who approached them, who ran, for example, the Randall Woodfin campaign, who is a young... Randall Woodfin is the mayor of Birmingham, newly elected mayor, who topped a man with 25 years of political experience. There were a lot of people involved in his campaign who approached the Jones campaign and said, hey, let us work for you. And their bids went upon deaf ears. And that's an example of how some of us were disengaged from the Jones campaign itself. However, similar to what Black Pac was saying, we as black people started mobilizing, started getting people involved, and Roy Moore was the candidate that was easy to hate.
Yeah.
His wife, the statements such as, when was America great? It was back when slavery. She said, we don't dislike Jews because we have a Jewish lawyer. Those are the types of things that the Moore campaign was saying that made it very easy for us to mobilize voters, say, this man, we definitely don't need to represent us and don't need him to represent the state of Alabama.
And Bernard Simelton, you know, the NAACP traditionally, and you go back and you look in places like Mississippi, Alabama in the 50s and 60s, particularly in the 60s, you know, were very much involved in the effort to register black voters, and it can be very difficult. I mean, places like Alabama and Mississippi were incredibly resistant to the idea of black people being able to vote. We haven't heard really about the NAACP as that kind of grassroots organization in quite a while. How did you guys manage to get back in that game, or is it wrong to say that you guys had been out of it?
Well, we have not been out of it. We've always registered voters. That's one of our bread and butters, and we always do that. But what happened this time is we used some new tools, new technologies to help concentrate on getting out the vote. And that's what we really concentrated on, is through social media, through Facebook. You know, we had over 900,000 hits on Facebook, and through text messages, sending messages out to people via text. Register to vote. Don't forget to register to vote. The deadline is 27 November. Don't forget to register to vote. And these things that's continuously was sent to the voters, and they realized that this is an important election and we've got to participate. And we had a lot of organizations, Socially In, HRC, People Demanding Action, and others march on that really came to us, and well, we went to them first, and then they started bringing on other people that really helped us put this campaign together that impressed on people the importance of getting out to vote. You don't want to sit this one out.
And John Hammondtree, you know, what was interesting about, you know, the Roy Moore versus, it was sort of the, you know, sort of sad little Roy Moore thing at the end where he didn't want to concede and he had this sort of sad little half-empty room, and the Doug Jones rally at the end was how diverse the Doug Jones rally was. On the stage is the people in the audience, and the fact that he did have this multiracial coalition. But when you actually go through and you look at the exits, he still lost white voters in Alabama by a significant margin. He lost white women. He lost white college-educated women. You know, we were putting up some of those numbers earlier. So it's not as if Jones was able to make a lot of headway with white voters. It really, am I wrong to say that it was the mobilization of the African-American vote that made the difference?
That definitely made a difference, but I mean, when the race is this close, I think you have to say that everything mattered. You know, I mean, he only got 49.9% of the vote, and so he did need that 30% of the white vote that did show up.
Sure.
And I think what should be encouraging for progressives and for the Democratic Party in Alabama is I believe that he won every demographic under 50.
Yeah.
And that's really what the future of the Democratic Party is going to have to focus on, because, yeah, everything that was done by Black PAC and Woke Vote and the NAACP, it was important, and it made him win. It made Doug Jones the senator-elect of Alabama. But a lot of those votes are concentrated in Congresswoman Terry Sewell's district. I mean, a lot of those votes on the state legislature level and on the state Senate level are concentrated in black districts. It has been gerrymandered in such a way that even when black voters flex their power and show the power of their voice, they're still underrepresented in the state Senate and the state House. And so
Okay, so check out that clip from AM Joy, MSNBC.com. That's from December 16, 2017, yesterday. Black voters, activists, huge factors in Doug Jones' win. Black voters, activists, huge factors in Doug Jones' win. Okay, now look at the article from NBCnews.com, December 12, 2017. So this article came out, what day was that? This was after last Sunday's show. Okay, this article came out Tuesday. This came out the day of the election. Moore versus Jones. Moore versus Jones. Where the Alabama Senate candidates stand on the issues. Okay, when we look at abortion, Roy Moore's stance, he's against abortion. Roy Moore wrote in 2007, babies piled in dumpster, abortion on demand. We know that Doug Jones' stance, he supports abortion rights. He supports a woman's right to choose. Doesn't mean that he's pro-abortion. He's going to take out an ad to promote abortion, but he's for a woman's right to choose. Doug Jones, interviewed on NBC News by Chuck Todd, said, "I'm not in favor of anything that's going to infringe on a woman's right and her freedom to choose." Okay, when we look at healthcare is huge in Alabama, as we talked about last week. In Alabama, there was a UN representative that's during a tour of the U.S. and looking at poverty, and they said they haven't seen poverty anywhere like in Alabama. Now, it's important to note, Donald Trump won Alabama by 30 points, number one. Number two, Alabama is a red state, heavily controlled by Republicans. Republican-controlled state legislature, and Doug Jones is the first Republican senator elected in 25 years. Okay, and we're about to get into some history of Alabama and tie this into African American history, because Alabama is one of those former Confederate states. Okay, one of those former Confederate states. We look at healthcare. Roy Moore is for repealing Obamacare, the mantra from the Republicans. All right, he wants to axe the healthcare law. Doug Jones wants to fix Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. And we know that African Americans, right now, we have the lowest uninsured rate in the history at 10%, which means more African Americans right now have health insurance because of the Affordable Health Care Act than any other time in history. And because of that, we have the highest average life expectancy right now at 72 years as well for African Americans also. Okay. And so check out this article, because it goes into some other stances as well on crime. Roy Moore has no clear plans for crime or criminal justice reform. Doug Jones, former U.S. attorney, he supports criminal justice reform. They have stances on immigration, etc. So check this out, NBCnews.com. I'm Michael Imhotep. You listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. The Superstation, the future of radio. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the voice of Detroit. We're in our second hour. We're live. It is Sunday, December 17th, 2017. This is the last show of the year. Last show of the year. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. You listen to 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the future of radio. And I want to remind you that I will be the keynote speaker for the Kwanzaa celebration at the second day of Kwanzaa, Kujichagulia, which means self-determination. We need some self-determination here in Detroit among African Americans all across the country. And they had self-determination in Alabama because they organized, they mobilized, they fought for their issues pertaining to their community. Contrary to what people around the country are saying, they're mobilized and they're going on to other things. They haven't stopped in Alabama. They have not stopped in Alabama. But it's taking place Tuesday, December 27th, organized by the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. Event is 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, 315 East Warren Avenue. And I'll be the keynote speaker. I guess I'll speak somewhere around 7 p.m., something like that. There's an African marketplace. They have Kwanzaa all 7 days. Visit theright.org, W-R-I-G-H-T, theright.org. Kwanzaa starts December 26th. Day after Christmas. I'll be there the first 3 days. I'm in Atlanta at the Shrine of the Black Madonna on Friday, December 29th, 2017, 6 p.m. For a screening of Black Friday Part 2. And I'll be on the panel discussion. And I'll be in Los Angeles at the Christ Unity Center, 7825 Southwestern Avenue, Los Angeles, California, on Saturday, December 30th and Sunday, December 31st, New Year's Eve. So I'm their keynote speaker for their Kwanzaa celebration on Saturday, December 30th. That's 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then I'll be doing a very special New Year's Eve presentation to wrap up the new year, wrap up this year and take us into the new year on Sunday, December 31st. Okay, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Christ Unity Center. Name of this presentation is African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump. Voter suppression, reparations, and how elections have consequences. So we'll have all this information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, the call-in number is 313-209-9000. 313-209-9000 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment, okay? And remember, you can read all of my articles that I write at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I wrote 3 articles this past week. All right. Now, right before the break, we were talking about the Alabama Senate race and how African Americans organized and mobilized, okay, and helped to finance many of their own, much of their own mobilization as well. But Alabama has a history that we really have to put into context when we deal with the significance of African Americans mobilizing, okay? So first of all, Alabama was one of the former Confederate states. And it was in 1861, January of 1861, New York Times had a big article about this, because New York Times has been around for over 100 years. And it was around January 1861 that Alabama announced their secession from the Union. Okay? They announced their secession from the Union. And one of the reasons why they seceded from the Union, of course, was because of slavery. All right? They wanted to maintain slavery. Okay, now, also we have to understand that Alabama was central to the civil rights movement, especially in the fight for the right to vote, but we see the civil rights movement starting in Alabama. So many people cite the beginning of the civil rights movement, December 1st, 1955, with Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the Cleveland Avenue bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And this causes the formation of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and a new minister to Montgomery, Alabama, named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is elected as president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. And the Montgomery bus boycott starts the morning, Monday morning, December 5th, 1955. It was supposed to be a one-day boycott. Because they got about 90% participation, they decided to continue the economic boycott. And it ended up lasting 381 days. Ended up lasting 381 days. But what ended segregation on the buses was the lawsuit of Browder versus Gale, filed February 1st, 1956. And this was 2 days after Dr. King's house was firebombed by white supremacists because of his participation in the Montgomery bus boycott. So it's important for people to understand that they were bombing so many African Americans' homes and businesses and things like this in Birmingham that they call Birmingham Bombingham. And we know September 15th, 1963, you have 4 white supremacists that bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church. And you had the 4 little African American girls who were killed. Okay? It was in 1957, Tuskegee, Alabama, that you had the Tuskegee, Alabama economic boycott. And this boycott lasted 4 times as long as the Montgomery bus boycott. It lasted for 4 years, from 1957 to 1961. Why did this boycott take place, which led to the lawsuit of Gomillion versus Lightfoot that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court? Why did this lawsuit take place? Because the state legislature in Alabama, they did gerrymandering, and they redistricted the district lines of Tuskegee, Alabama, to lock out most of the African Americans who were registered to vote, and to bring in a lot of white voters, okay, so that they could vote in Tuskegee. They tried to redraw the district lines. And when you research this, the Tuskegee economic boycott of 1957, they talk about how the district lines were redrawn to resemble a 28-sided seahorse, S-E-A-H-O-R-S-E. Okay, I've talked about this here before on the show. All right, and I have a YouTube video about this as well. Go to my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and connect you to our YouTube channel. I have a video about this because we talked about it here on the show before. And African Americans said that we're not going to economically support businesses that are working against us, because this was 3 years after the White Citizens Council was formed in 1954 in Mississippi. The White Citizens Council was formed as a direct result of Brown versus Board of Education desegregation case in 1954. And the White Citizens Council is going to spread all throughout the South. Who were members of the White Citizens Council? They were probably worse than the Ku Klux Klan, because they were out in the open. And you know who they were. They were landowners, business owners, bankers, politicians. In Mississippi, the White Citizens Council put their political weight behind Ross Barnett, and Ross Barnett became the governor of Mississippi, supported by the White Citizens Council. So African Americans in Tuskegee, Alabama, and they had a higher literacy rate than most of the white people in Tuskegee, because of Tuskegee Institute, they said we're not going to financially support businesses that are working against our own interests. They said we're not going to finance our own dehumanization. So they had a 4-year economic boycott to fight against this, and they ended up putting 100 white businesses out of business. Okay, the Tuskegee economic boycott of 1957. So you have that, and that leads to the lawsuit that goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, lawsuit of Gomillion versus Lightfoot. So then you have March 7th, 1965, where you have 600 African Americans who have a march, and they're going from Selma to Montgomery. And this is known as Bloody Sunday. This was after a march on February 17th where Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. And these protesters, all right, peaceful protesters, led by members of SNCC, like today Representative John Lewis, are going to be beaten by the Alabama State Troopers. It's called Bloody Sunday. This is in Alabama. Okay? And we know that in September 15th, 1963, you had the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, which was about 3 weeks after the March on Washington, which was August 28th, 1963. So you have to understand some history of Alabama and why it's red today, controlled by Republicans, and it's a former Confederate state. It's a former state that had slavery, and Alabama succeeds from the Union to fight against the Union because they want to keep slavery. So you wonder why they have such high incarceration rates of African Americans today in Alabama. Alabama has the highest incarceration rates in the country. You wonder why they have rampant voter suppression of African Americans and Hispanics in Alabama. Now read this article from New York Times, January 12, 1861. Listen to me, 1861. This is the year that the Civil War starts. The New York Times has been around over 100 years. Read this article, the Alabama Convention, passage of the Ordinance of Succession. New York Times, January 12th, 1861. Okay? And it talks about why they're seceding from the Union. Now, if we look at this article from the New York Times, December 11th, 2017, last week, the Alabama Senate race may have already been decided. The Alabama Senate race may have already been decided. So this article came out Monday, December 11th, 2017, the day before the election. This article deals with the rampant voter suppression taking place in Alabama and the voter disenfranchisement because of felony convictions. Now, this article is written by Scott Douglas. Scott Douglas is the executive director of Greater Birmingham Ministries, which provides emergency services for people in need. It's an op-ed article he wrote for the New York Times, December 11, 2017. Here's what he said. He said the Senate election in Alabama on Tuesday, which was taking place the day after this article was written, is not just about the choice between Doug Jones and Roy Moore. It's also about a voter suppression campaign that may well sway the result of a close race. In 2011, Alabama lawmakers passed a photo ID law, ostensibly to combat voter fraud. But voter impersonation at polling places virtually never happens. It's extremely rare, especially coordinated voter impersonation. The truth is that the lawmakers wanted to keep Black and Latino voters from the ballot box. We know this because they've always been clear about their intentions. A state senator who had tried for a decade to get the bill into law told the Huntsville Times. The Huntsville Times was a local newspaper there in Alabama. He told the Huntsville Times that a photo ID law would undermine Alabama's quote-unquote black power structure. He said a photo ID law will undermine Alabama's black power structure. In the Montgomery Advertiser, another newspaper, he said that the absence of an ID law, quote unquote, benefits black elected leaders. Now, the bill sponsor, the photo ID law of 2011 in Alabama, the bill sponsors were even caught on tape devising a plan to depress the turnout of African American voters who they called, quote unquote, aborigines and illiterates, who would ride, quote unquote, HUD financed buses. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, HUD financed buses to the voter polls in the 2010 midterm election by keeping a gambling referendum off the ballot. Gambling is popular among black voters in Alabama, so they thought if it remained on the ballot, black voters would show up to vote in droves. So they worked to keep that initiative off the ballot to suppress the African American vote. So now the question you should ask yourself is, if your vote didn't matter, why do Republicans go to such extreme measures to keep you from voting and make it harder for you to vote? Then you have to look at, when you study Alabama in the past few years, they've closed a number of Department of Motor Vehicle locations. Many of those locations they closed were in communities heavily populated by African Americans. So they passed the photo ID law in 2011. It's the DMV that you have to go to get the proper ID. So then they start closing DMVs in heavily populated African American communities to make it harder for you to get the ID that they say you need to vote. These people are playing grandmaster level chess, and we're playing beginner's checkers and don't even understand all the rules of checkers. But in Alabama, they fought back last Tuesday. Now, the article goes on to say, photo ID laws may seem innocuous. For many of us, it might be easy to take a few hours off from work, drive to the nearest Department of Motor Vehicle office, wait in line, take some tests, hand over $40, and leave with a driver's license that we can use to vote. But this requires resources that many rural, low-income people around the country simply do not have. So, once again, this article is written by Scott Douglas. Scott Douglas is Executive Director of Greater Birmingham Ministries in Birmingham, Alabama. And this Greater Birmingham Ministries provides emergency services for people in need. So Scott Douglas said, I work with poor African American Alabamians, citizens of Alabama. He said many of them don't have cars or driver's licenses and make under $10,000 a year. He said they cannot afford to pay someone to drive them to the motor vehicles or registrar's office, which is often miles away. Why? Because a few years ago, they closed a lot of DMVs. There were stories. Roland Martin reported about this on News One Now with Roland Martin. This is one of the ways I found out about this. Photo ID laws are written to make it difficult for people like them to vote, poor African Americans and Hispanics. He goes on to say, and that's exactly what happens. Now, a study by Zoltan Hajnal, H-A-J-N-A-L, a political scientist at the University of California, San Diego, comparing the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, found that the voter ID law kept African American voters from the polls. Because keep in mind, this was, as we talked about before, the 2016 election, presidential election, was the first election that the full weight of the 1965 Voting Rights Act did not exist. Why? Because Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which dealt with pre-clearance, was struck down by the 2013 U.S. Supreme Court case of Shelby County versus Holder. Well, where is Shelby County located? Alabama. So Shelby County in Alabama, which is an affluent county, sued Holder. Who was Holder? Attorney General Eric Holder. And the U.S. Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Who cheered the gutting of the Voting Rights Act? Jeff Sessions, former senator of Alabama. Well, where's Jeff Sessions now? Jeff Sessions is Attorney General. These people are playing grandmaster level chess. I'm telling you. We're playing beginner's checkers and don't even understand all the rules to checkers. Do you think they're saying that votes don't matter? No, they're trying to suppress your vote because they are afraid of what happens when African Americans wake up and realize the power of our votes. That's why they're going through such extreme measures to suppress your vote. They value our vote more than we do. But in Alabama, they fought back. Hashtag fight back. So photo ID laws are written to make it difficult for people like poor African Americans to vote. So after Alabama implemented its strict voter ID law in 2011, turnout in its most racially diverse counties declined by almost 5 percentage points, which is even more than the drop in diverse counties in other states. The study controls for numerous factors that might otherwise affect an election. How much money was spent on the races, the state's partisan makeup, changes in electoral laws like early voting and day of registration, and shifts in incentives to vote, like which party controls the state legislature. Now in Alabama, you have an estimated 118,000 people who are registered to vote that do not have photo ID that they can use to vote. This is rampant voter suppression taking place. Let me repeat this. In Alabama, you have an estimated 118,000 registered voters that do not have photo ID. That is needed to vote because of their 2011 voter ID law. Now, African American and Hispanic voters are nearly twice as likely as white voters to lack such documentation, which is why Republicans put it in place. Because when you look at who's putting these photo ID laws and who has been putting these photo ID laws in place, 99% of the time it's coming from Republicans. 99% of the time, those laws are written by Republicans on purpose. In other words, Alabama's law is nothing but a naked attempt to suppress the voting rights of people of color. That's why his organization, Greater Birmingham Ministries, with the help of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, has sued the state of Alabama to block the photo ID law. The case will go to trial in February of 2018. When the law was passed in 2011, it so reeked of discrimination that state politicians did not bother to submit it to the federal government for approval, as Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act required. For decades, Section 5 had acted as a crucial prophylactic, stopping discriminatory voting laws before any election. Instead, the ID law remained dormant until June of 2013, when the U.S. Supreme Court's devastating ruling in Shelby County versus Holder suspended Section 5's pre-clearance requirement. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, then a United States Senator, U.S. Senator from Alabama, applauded the ruling as quote-unquote good news for the South. Oh yeah, the South should rise again. Doesn't Jeff Sessions sound like a Klansman? I never met a Klansman. But if I did, he'd probably sound like Jeff Sessions. For Jeff Sessions, who called the Voting Rights Act an quote-unquote intrusive piece of legislation, it was a victory. But for voters in Alabama and the rest of the South, it was terrible news. It left states like Alabama, Texas, and North Carolina free to test the limits of voter suppression. Indeed, after the decision, Alabama announced the photo ID law would go into effect without federal approval. The photo ID law isn't the only obstacle in front of Alabama voters. Okay, so Scott Douglas's organization, once again, Birmingham Ministries, his organization is also challenging the state's felon disenfranchisement law. Alabama's felon disenfranchisement law, which affects an estimated 250,000 people in the state of Alabama. 15% of Alabama's African American voting age population are affected by this law, can't vote. Listen to this, 15% of Alabama's voting age population of African Americans can't vote because of felonies. And Alabama has the highest incarceration rates in the country, but fewer than 5% of whites, fewer than 5% of white people of voting age have are disenfranchised because of felonies. Now, this law bars people with felonies of quote-unquote moral turpitude from voting. For decades, such crimes were ill-defined, but once included things like miscegenation. Okay, a new law narrowed the list of disenfranchising crimes, but a federal judge ruled this summer that the state is not required to inform people with convictions who could not vote under the old law that they may now register to vote. Wait a second, hold on. If somebody has been disenfranchised, listen to this. A new law narrowed the list of disenfranchising crimes, but a federal judge ruled this past summer that the state of Alabama is not required to inform people with felony convictions who could not vote under the old law that now they can register to vote. So you have African Americans who have felony convictions and can register to vote but don't know it because the state of Alabama is not required to let them know this. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break. We'll talk a little bit about Omarosa. We'll also talk about Tavis, Smiley, and what is Kwanzaa, reconnecting African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment. I'm Michael Imhotep. You listen to the African History Network Show, 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the future of radio. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network Show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the voice of Detroit. Yeah, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can keep up with me, find out where I'll be speaking. Remember, here in Detroit, I'll be at the first 3 days of Kwanzaa, December 26th through December 28th at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And I'm that's Tuesday, December 26th, Wednesday, December 27th, Thursday, December 28th. Wednesday, December 27th, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'm the keynote speaker. I think I speak around 7 p.m., something like that, 7:30. I'm the keynote speaker. And for the Kwanzaa celebration, second day of Kwanzaa, Kuji Chagalia, which means self-determination. And my presentation is called What is Kwanzaa? Reconnecting African Americans to African Culture for Self-Empowerment in the Era of Donald Trump. Reconnecting African Americans to African Culture for Self-Empowerment in the Era of Donald Trump. You don't want to miss that. All right? And you can order my Kwanzaa presentation. We have that at our website also. Okay, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Let me give you a couple of articles here, and then I'm going to go back to this one about the Alabama Senate race. Okay, so the one from January 12, 1861, 3 months before the U.S. Civil War started. U.S. Civil War starts April 12, 1861, with the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Name of this article, The Alabama Convention, Passage of the Ordinance of Succession. This deals with excerpts of Alabama's Statement of Succession from the Union and them joining the Confederate States of America, the CSA. Okay. Then also check out this article. Black citizens boycott white merchants for U.S. voting rights. Tuskegee, Alabama, 1957 to 61. This deals with the Tuskegee, Alabama economic boycott of 1957 that most people know absolutely nothing about. And because the state legislature was trying to nullify our voting rights in Alabama. Black citizens boycott white merchants for U.S. voting rights. Tuskegee, Alabama, 1957 to 1961. That's from the Global Nonviolent Action Database. Okay. All right. So I want to go back to this article, wrap this up. The Alabama Senate race may have already been decided. New York Times, December 11, 2017, by Scott Douglas. And Scott Douglas is executive director of Greater Birmingham Ministries, which is an organization that provides emergency services for people in need. Okay. So he was talking about the voter suppression in Alabama, and he was talking about the voter disenfranchisement because of the state's felon disenfranchisement law of Alabama. Okay, so he goes on to say that sadly on Tuesday, so he wrote it last Monday. He was talking about the next day, Tuesday, Election Day. Sadly on Tuesday, many of the voters who would most benefit from picking lawmakers who will represent their interests in the U.S. Senate will be kept away from the polls. Those voters are disparaged for their purported disengagement with the election, while the state's voter suppression campaign is largely ignored. So many people will say, oh, well, you know, these people didn't want to vote, these people didn't vote. No, it's many people could not vote because of various voter suppression tactics and voter intimidation as well. So if you look at the article that I wrote about Rose Sanders. Now, Rose Sanders is a 72-year-old African-American activist from Alabama. I met Rose Sanders back in October, I think it was October, in Philadelphia at the 20th anniversary of the Million Woman March in Philadelphia. The name of the article that I wrote is called Rose Sanders Was Threatened with Death for Organizing Black Voters in Alabama in 2017. Rose Sanders was threatened with death for organizing black voters in Alabama in 2017. And Rose Sanders is co-founder and coordinator of the Vote or Die campaign in Alabama. And she tells her story of how she was threatened by a white man, had her voter information she had with her taken away from her, and he threatened her with death. You read that article, it has the video of her talking about it in there. You can read all of my articles, once again, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If the African-American vote does not matter, then why was there rampant voter suppression and voter intimidation in Alabama last Tuesday? Explain that to me. Republicans value our vote more than we do. So, sadly on Tuesday, many of the voters who would most benefit from picking lawmakers who will represent their interests in the U.S. Senate will be kept away from the polls. Those voters are disparaged for their purported disengagement with the election, while the state's voter suppression campaign is largely ignored. He goes on to say, Scott Douglas goes on to say, we've made too much progress to tolerate this. Federal courts must reject the voter ID law. Congress needs to restore the Voting Rights Act to its full strength. Nothing less than our democracy is at stake. Okay? So once again, check this article out. New York Times, December 11, 2017. The Alabama Senate race may have already been decided, but we know African Americans mobilize and organize, okay, to fight for their interests. Okay, so this past week we saw Paris Denard get called out on CNN. There was a panel of African-American conservatives. News1.com has this article. CNN's Paris Denard called a sellout on national TV by another Republican, another black Republican. Paris Denard's a black Republican. He's a sellout. You know, he was called a sellout by Shermichael Singleton. Okay, so check out this article. It's hilarious. And Shermichael Singleton was fired. He had a little job in the Trump administration. Dr. Ben Carson hooked him up. Dr. Ben Carson, his mentor. But Shermichael Singleton was fired from the Trump administration because of, I think this was a social media post, okay, that he wrote, actually was a statement he made for an article for thehill.com, okay, in 2016. Shermichael Singleton, African-American Republican, he's about 26, 27. If you watch News One Now with Roland Martin, you've seen him on there. A lot of times he makes no sense whatsoever. But since he's gotten fired, he has a little backbone now. Now he's making a little more sense. He got his wake-up call, all right? He said in 2016, quote, my party in particular has allowed itself to be taken over by someone who claims to be a Republican but doesn't represent any of our values, principles, or traditions, okay? And because of this statement, he got fired from the Trump administration, all right? Now, Anthony Scaramucci was on Fox News, on TV, on Fox News, the Fox News network, saying that Trump wasn't a Republican, talking negatively about Trump. He ended up getting a job as White House communication director. He's white, by the way, you know. He was on Fox News disparaging Donald Trump, and he got hired the job as White House communication director. Shermichael Singleton had a job, don't even know what the title was. In the Trump administration, he gets fired for this statement in the Hill. But he called Paris Denard a sellout on CNN. So check out this article. CNN's Paris Denard called a sellout on national television by another black Republican. You know, question has to be asked, you know, to black Republicans. You know, what happens when you have outlived your usefulness to white supremacy and they no longer have a need for you? Speaking of black Republicans that get pushed outside, Omarosa. We got rid of Omarosa and Roy Moore in the same day, this past Tuesday. Omarosa fired by the White House. Chief of Staff John Kelly pushed out. Now, April Ryan, who I met at the Congressional Black Caucus weekend 2 years ago, TheHill.com has an article, April Ryan, Omarosa fired by Kelly, escorted out of the White House. Now, we know Omarosa went on Good Morning America. She was interviewed by Michael Strahan. She disputes this. She said she resigned, and she talked about, you know, there's some things that she saw in the administration she didn't like, and blah, blah, blah. You had plenty of chances to leave. You know, nobody's buying this drama. Omarosa's a drama queen. Nobody's buying this. All right. But if we look at the reporting from April Ryan on Wednesday, and she's White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks, she said Omarosa did not resign. She was even escorted out of the building and off campus. Okay? And April Ryan reported this, citing multiple sources at the White House. April Ryan went on to say she was very upset and said she wanted to speak to the president, according to sources. Chief of Staff General Kelly said the president was already informed and he signed off. He signed off on her firing. Now, sources, April Ryan says sources say General Kelly did the firing, and Omarosa is alleged to have acted very vulgar and cursed a lot and said she helped elect President Trump. Okay? The word is General Kelly had it and got rid of her. Now, nobody knows what the heck Omarosa's job is. We know her title. You know, the liaison director to director to the office of liaison, whatever. Nobody knows what her job description is, even in the White House. They don't know. They can't tell you what she actually does. All right, so check out this article. Now, Omarosa got clowned all over Twitter, and she got clowned on CNN as well. So Angela Rye, April Ryan, and also Simone Sanders, who used to head up, who used to be a spokesperson for Bernie Sanders. They were being interviewed on CNN, and Angela Rye had to be petty for a minute and go in on Omarosa. Here's what happened. Turn it over here. Thanks.
The high drama person of the high drama, high profile African American individual in the White House is no longer to be tolerated. But there are lots of other problematic high drama individuals that still have jobs.
Well, Brooke, go ahead, Angela. I want to hear you, and then I do want to talk about the black vote in Alabama.
I want to talk about the black vote too. But Brooke, I'm going to do what you can't do, and what April and Simone are too good of people to do, and that's just going to be petty for a minute. Ah!
Oh, Angela. Oh,
bye,
Angela.
girl.
Oh,
bye.
Angela.
We did it already on the podcast, April, but bye, honey. You have never represented the community. You are skin folk. We don't own you like Zora. Goodbye. Good riddance. Goodbye. Deuces.
Angela, you
That's
know
it.
I have much love for you, but you know what? I don't delight in anyone's demise.
I'm not delighting in her demise. I wish her the best, but
I would say no. Again, I don't think I can just speak for myself, and maybe some other folks that folks weren't necessarily sad to see Omarosa go today.
Okay.
No.
Ain't no love in the heart of the city. Hey, good riddance. All right. So it looks like Omarosa's gonna have a tell-all book. I don't know how that's gonna sell, but anyway, bye. All right. Bye, Felicia. That's what Robin Roberts said on Good Morning America tour. Okay. Good riddance to you. We got rid of Roy Moore. I mean, this was a bad week for black Republicans. You got Paris Denard called a sellout by another sellout black Republican, Michael Singleton, who has a little backbone now. Omarosa got kicked out of the White House. You know, what happens to black Republicans when they have outlived their usefulness to white supremacy? This is a question you should ask yourself. All right. Okay, so this study came out this past week. There were some articles written. Washington Post had a really good article. News media offers consistently warped portrayals of black families. Study finds. Good article from Blavity.com. New study finds news outlets promote false, negative portrayals of black families that don't match reality, despite government data disproving them. News outlets perpetuate stereotypes such as welfare queens and absentee fathers. Now, you've heard me say before, power is the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. Okay? Power is the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. And one of my teachers, Dr. Lyndon Jeffries, talks about whoever controls the images, controls the self-esteem, the self-development, the self-worth of the people. Whoever controls the history controls the vision. So this was a joint study, and Blavity is spelled Blavity, Blavity.com. This was a joint study between colorchange.org that you've heard me talk about numerous times, colorchange.org, they do some really good work, and Family Story. So the power of the media is very real, especially when it comes to our perception of the world. And a new report suggests that the media may be warping Americans' understanding of reality. No, they are warping Americans' understanding of reality. You have 6 multinational media corporations that control 90% of what you read, see, and hear. 6 multinational media corporations. You have Comcast. Now, this is before the merger of Disney acquiring 21st Century Fox, right? So you have Comcast, you have Walt Disney, you have News Corp, which owns the Fox News Network, the Fox TV Network, things like this. You have Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS Corp. Okay, 6 multinational media corporations that control 90% of what you read, see, and hear. Now, according to the Washington Post, once again, the article from the Washington Post is called "News Media Offers Consistently Warped Portrayals of Black Families, Study Finds." A recent color of change and family story study found that the news media has had a significant hand in negatively skewing the perceptions of black families. Negatively skewing the perceptions of black families. As one of my heroes, Malcolm X, said, he said, the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent, and that's power because they control the minds of the masses. Now, the study's researchers reviewed over 800 local and national news pieces published or aired between January 2015 and December 2016, sampling major networks such as ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, as well as major print publications such as the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, USA Today, Los Angeles Times, and Chicago Tribune. The study was conducted by the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign communications professor Tavis L. Dixon. He found that national news outlets were more likely to show African American families as broken and dysfunctional like on the TV show Empire, on the Fox TV network, owned by Rupert Murdoch. They're more likely to show African American families as being broken and dysfunctional, while they're more likely to show white families as possessing social stability. These images are not only distorted but contradict government data. So Professor Tavis L. Dixon found that African American families represent 59% of poor people portrayed in media, but actually only make up 27% of Americans living in poverty. In contrast, white families only make up 17% of the poor represented in media stories, but make up 66% of the poor in reality. There's a lot of poor white people across the country who consistently vote Republican. Can't figure that one out. Well, it's because of white supremacy and racism, but they haven't figured it out yet. So, as far as criminal depictions go, African-American criminals represented 37% of the media's criminals in media stories, of these 800 media stories they surveyed, while only 26% of those arrested on criminal charges are African-American in real life. So they're disproportionate, African-Americans are disproportionately shown as criminals in media stories. It doesn't correlate with the arrest rates. Now, white criminals represented 28% of the criminals portrayed in the media, but make up 77% of real life criminal suspects. Wait a second, hold on. Like, you're dealing with the propaganda of the media. Power is the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. White criminals represented 28% of the criminals portrayed in the media, but they make up 77% of real life criminal suspects. I wonder what that's about. Now, the report argues that constant depictions of African American people living in poor, welfare dependent, and broken homes due to absentee fathers has created a negative image of African American families in general. We can look at Donald Trump just a couple of days ago speaking to a graduating class of FBI agents talking about what the heck is going on in Chicago. And we look at how he talks negatively about African American communities. Now, he does not talk disparagingly about West Virginia, about Maine, about Vermont, about Ohio that have numerous white communities ravaged by opioid addiction. And they have high crime rates. He doesn't talk negatively about that. But he negatively talks about the African American community consistently when it comes to crime, but he doesn't want to deal with other circumstances that causes that crime. He takes a heavy-handed approach to Chicago, but takes a soft, loving, understanding approach to West Virginia and Vermont. Now, Professor Tavis L. Dixon said, quote, "This leaves people with the opinion that African Americans are plagued with self-imposed dysfunction that creates family instability and therefore all their problems." They're not looking at historical circumstances. They're not looking at political circumstances. We're blamed for our own problems, but other people are not. See, when they have opioid addiction ravaging the white community, they don't blame that on absentee fathers. There's a distinct difference. Furthermore, these depictions can affect black families on a systematic level. Professor Tavis L. Dixon noted that the images can spark political rhetoric, and the powerful buying into these narratives are what causes Congress to gut social safety net programs. It causes employers to implement harsher work and drug testing requirements and general disdain for welfare programs. Okay, so if you look at just what happened this past week, now they're calling for work requirements, okay, for Medicaid recipients. They're talking about after they pass this horrific tax bill that's going to blow up the deficit by $1.4 to $1.5 trillion. They're talking about then going after Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security and gutting it. We just saw Senator Grassley, who's a Republican senator, talking about how poor people on government assistance are blowing their money on alcohol and women, things like this. That just happened in the last 2 weeks. The study also notes that during the Great Depression, white families suffering from poverty were presented in the media as having run into hard luck, and that there were campaigns to help them through the tough times. However, over time, the media and political leaders worked to pathologize African American families in the American imagination to justify slavery, to justify Jim Crow, justify mass incarceration, justify widespread economic inequity, and justify urban disinvestment, as well as to gain and maintain political and social power. And this was said by Nicole Rogers, founder of Family Story, which was the co-organization that did this study. Check out the rest of this article. Blavity.com, BLAVITY.com. Blavity, Blavity.com. New study finds news outlets promote false, negative portrayals of black families that don't match reality. All right. Well, look, we got to get out of here and make way for Pastor Mo. Check out my article about Kwanzaa at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's an article I wrote a couple of years ago. Kwanzaa reconnects African Americans to African culture for self-empowerment. We'll see you at the Kwanzaa celebration at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. I'll see you all in Atlanta and in Los Angeles. And happy holidays, happy New Year's. This is the last live broadcast of the year. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Right now, it's correct wrong behaviors. Not over till we win. You listen to 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. We'll talk to you next year. Peace.